Hey, 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 it's Mrs. Stellhorn. I've got another sick kid. Not another one, but just the same one keeps getting sick. So, what I need you guys to all understand, as well as the substitute. First off, substitute, they are not supposed to be on their phones. So if you see somebody on their phone after this moment, because sometimes you just got to remind them, if you could just say, hey, give me your cell phone, and they're going to cough up their cell phone without complaint or resistment or whatever that is. Anyway, so they're going to cough up their cell phone, give it to you, and you give it to them at the end of the hour. All right, what I need you to do is multiply each fraction by the common denominator of what you think is the common denominator. In both situations, see if you can come up with this. Give them about 5 minutes to think. So substitute, please pause. Now, let's go over these warm-ups. So the common denominator, whenever you have what we call prime factors in the denominator, the common denominator will be the product of those prime factors. So the common denominator is BD. And then you ask yourself, all right, in the first fraction, what does this denominator not have? Well, it doesn't have the D. So we're going to multiply top and bottom by D. So here's what it looks like in length. You have A over B times the missing piece of the denominator. And then in the second fraction, we see, okay, it doesn't have the B part, so we're going to multiply by a form of 1. We've talked about that form of 1 last week. All right, now that we have a common denominator, and I'm going to show the next step down below. Now that we have a common denominator, we have AD plus CB all over the common denominator BD. All right, so that's the answer for the first one. Second one, you've got to figure out what is the common denominator. These are not both prime factors. This 2x is not a prime factor. It's a 2 and an x. So the common denominator, well, they both have the 2 in common, but they don't have the x in common. So common denominator is what they have in common and what they don't have in common. So they have 2 already in common, but then we also need x to be there in order to get these numerators together. So you ask yourself, in the first fraction, what does the first fraction not have? And it doesn't have, well, it has everything, so I don't need to multiply it by anything. So we just leave it as y over 2x. Now the second fraction is missing the x in the bottom, so I'm going to multiply by x over x. Now I can get those numerators together. It's y minus 3x all over 2x. That's what we're doing today. Next piece of the warm-up is, do you remember how to divide fractions? So some of you may not have realized, oh, there was another warm-up because it was on the next slide. So do you remember how to divide fractions? Keep, change, flip. Keep, change, flip. So we're going to keep the first fraction as it is, change division to multiplication, and flip your second fraction. So it's no longer C over D, it's now D over C. And then we multiply across. So the answer to this one was AD over BC. All right, let's start notes. We're going to talk about addition, subtraction, and a little bit of complex fractions. This is more trig pre-calc, complex fractions. Not so much algebra 2. I'm just going to expose it to you because it is on the ACT, SAT, whatever have you. But we're going to concentrate more on addition and subtraction of these rational functions. Let's talk about finding the least common denominators when it gets even more crazy. So not just monomials, that's what the warm-up was about, whenever monomials were in the denominator. What happens if you have a trinomial or a binomial in the denominator. How are we going to do it? Well, we got to recall what we used to do with numbers. So the least common denominator between 18 and 24 is 72. And let's recall why. 18 has factors. If you did the factor tree, it'd break up into 2 times 3 times 3. By the way, you don't have this on your guided notes, so please write this down. 18 breaks down into 2 times 3 times 3. 24 breaks down into 2 times 2 times 3. You've got to keep in mind, what do they have in common? So that's how this 72 is developed. What do they have in common? They have a 2 and a 3 in common. And then what do they not have in common? You got to circle all of that. They don't have another 3 in common or 2 more 2s. So that's how the least common denominators developed. They have a 2 in common, they have a 3 in common, then they need another 3, and they need 2 more 2s. If you multiply all those together, let's see. The 2 times 2 times 2 is an 8, 3 times 3 is a 9, so 8 times 9, that gets us to 72. We've got to keep this in mind. You've got to have what they have in common. So they had a 2 and a 3. And then what do they not have in common? That's going to give you your least common denominator. They didn't have in common a 3 and 2 more 2s. Now, I realize when you did this in Algebra 1, or actually, no, not just Algebra 1, but 4th grade, when you found the least common denominator, you would talk about exponents. But I'm going to talk about more, what do they have in common, what do they not have in common. You got to include all of that for this more difficult stuff. Here we go. Find the least common denominator between these two guys. So you don't concentrate on the numerator, concentrate on what you got in the denominator. So the first denominator, this x times x minus 7, the two factors are, well, x and x minus 7. It's already factored. The second denominator, we actually have to factor it. The second denominator breaks up into, let's see, x and x. What multiplies to negative 7 adds to negative 6, a negative 7 and a positive 1. So notice what they have in common. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Hold on. Sorry, technology glitch. What do they have in common? They have this x minus 7 in common. What do they not have in common? So the least common denominator is going to be x minus 7 times what they don't have in common, the x and the x plus 1. That's the entire least common denominator. Now in homework, you're not going to be asked to find the least common denominator. That is part of the strategy. So it's the next example that looks like your homework. In order to subtract or add rational numbers, you've got to have a least common denominator. So let's factor these denominators, see what they have in common and what they don't have in common. All right, so if I factored that first denominator, it breaks up into, let's see, what multiplies to 3, adds to 4. It's positive 3, positive 1. That second denominator, it's a difference of squares, so it breaks up into x minus 3, x plus 3. So if I were to do a thought box, the first denominator has x plus 3, x plus 1. The second denominator has x minus 3, x plus 3. So what do they share? You can see that they share that x plus 3. That'll be part of my least common denominator. What do they not share? What they don't share is what you're going to need to multiply by. So the least common denominator involves that x plus 3, involves the x plus 1, and the x minus 3. Oh no, out of my thought box. Un momentito. Okay, done with the technology glitch. So we figured out our least common denominator. It's what they did have, that x plus 3, what they don't have, including the x plus 1 and x minus 3. So with each fraction, we're going to have to multiply by a form of 1 of what they still need. So, hold on a moment. So that first fraction needs the x minus 3. So you're going to write down that first fraction. And again, this is notes, so I'm showing every step, so that way when I go back to notes, I'm actually going to know what I'm doing. I'm going to multiply times x minus 3 over x minus 3. Oh, notice how that numerator was a binomial, not just a monomial. There's two terms here. Let's actually encompass that binomial together with parentheses. The second fraction needs to be multiplied by x plus 1, or it's missing an x plus 1 in the denominator, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by x plus 1 over x plus 1. Notice how that numerator is a monomial, so I don't need to encompass it with parentheses. So I now have a common denominator. I'm going to write the product of the numerators. I should say the difference of those numerators together all over the common denominator. X plus 3, x minus 3, x plus 1. So we're going to take some time and double distribute x minus 1 times x minus 3 minus the distribution that we're going to do of x and x plus 1. We're going to completely distribute, get like terms together. So substitute, please pause this so they can take some time to try distributing and getting like terms together. Pause it, maybe only give 2 minutes for this. So for the answer, I have a feeling that if you did not get my answer, it may be because you didn't realize that you're distributing a negative x here. So it's negative x squared minus x. That's why I have that in blue. Or you forgot that whenever you double distribute in the first set of parentheses, you've got middle terms there you got to get together. So final answer would be negative 5x plus 3 over x plus 3, x minus 3 times the quantity x plus 1. You could completely distribute that denominator, but that's not what I'm looking for. I've already tested your skills in Chapter 6 of whether or not you know how to multiply binomials together. The thing you got to definitely check at the end, though, especially on the ACT, SAT, they like to trip you up on this. They want to see if, hey, after you get those like terms together, do they have a greatest common factor? Can you reduce in any way? You always got to check, can you reduce your fractions? Negative 5x and positive 3 don't have a greatest common factor. So anyway, you always check to see, can you reduce your fraction? All right, next, let's see if we can simplify this complex fraction. And before we can do keep, change, flip, we got to get this bottom as one fraction. So I'm going to concentrate on getting this bottom as one fraction. Notice how the denominators are both monomials and they're both prime. So the common denominator is 2x here. So just concentrating on that denominator piece. If you have 6 over x minus 1/2, notice how I'm leaving a gap? You've got to multiply 6 over x by whatever it does not have in its denominator. So it doesn't have the 2. I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 2. In the second fraction, I'm going to multiply by, well, it's missing an x, so I'm going to multiply by x over x. And now they'll have the common denominator, 12 minus x over 2x. This is what I'm going to take this first fraction divided by. Now let's go back up to the top. We have 15 over 2x plus 2 divided by, no longer this stuff, I'm going to have 12 minus x over 2x. Keep, change, flip. Keep your first fraction, 15 over 2x plus 2. Change division to multiplication and flip your second fraction. Now we're back to the 9.4 stuff. 9.4 was, all right, now we have two fractions multiplied by each other. We need to factor and, hold on a second, factor, and then find forms of 1 that'll cancel out or reduce. The only thing I can factor so far is this denominator, so we'll factor it. It's got a greatest common factor of 2. Everything else, whoop, whoop, whoop. All right. So actually the only thing I can reduce by is this monomial of 2. Notice how this 2 is held together on both sides by multiplication. So I can undo this 2 using division. I guess I circled them and typically we just... So final answer is 15x over x plus 1 times 12 minus x. And again, I can leave that. So the point of today is figuring out least common denominators, multiplying by forms of 1 of whatever the denominator does not have as part of the least common denominator. And to find that least common denominator, you have to figure out what factors do they share and what factors do they not share in order to get the least common denominator. You can find more examples in your textbook, and if you have questions, you can always send me something on Remind. So substitute as of right now, they can have their cell phone out on their desk, but out on their desk. It's got to be on top of your desk. Like don't try to be shady and putting it beneath your desk. That's questionable behavior. You know this. So anyway, just have it out and about. They can take pictures of the textbook, starting their homework and stuff. You already have this homework listed on your sheet of paper. And get stuff turned into the green box. If you want to check to see if you got it right, you can send me a message if I'm not, taking a nap or whatever because my daughter kept me up all night, whatever. Anyway, just do something. Don't just sit there and do nothing. So now the substitute's going to be walking around, making sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. As in the homework, get stuff in the green box. All right. Thank you. Have a nice day.